Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl, and today I'm doing my review of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling. I mentioned that I was going to be doing a review of the Harry Potter books as I'm reading through them. This, I actually did my reread a couple months ago, but hopefully I won't forget anything that I wanted to say. First, I want to have a section that is non-spoilery, and then I will get into some spoilers with this. So, for anyone who hasn't read this book, this is about Harry, who is a young boy who has just turned 11, and he gets a letter of acceptance to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He is an orphan. At the very beginning of the book, you see him orphaned and dropped off at his aunt and uncle's house, where he is raised with a cousin that is the same age as him. The aunt and uncle and cousin do not treat him well, and so he is more than happy to leave them to go off to Hogwarts, the School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. We learn that there is a wizard that is responsible for having killed his parents, and he tried to kill Harry, leaving a little lightning scar on his forehead. And so in this book, Harry is going off to school for the first time. He is learning about his past, learning about the magical world, making friends, and starting on this journey that he will go on over the course of the 7 books. I love Harry Potter. We all know that, obviously. I wouldn't be doing a readathon about it this month. I wouldn't be talking about it so much the last few weeks if I didn't. In my video last week, I mentioned how I got into Harry Potter. That has kind of been covered already. But I think that this book in particular, I think it's really fun. I feel like it's really magical. I feel like it really pulls you in to the story immediately. I feel like she is so good at drawing the characters. So there are tons of characters, and I am actually somebody who has a lot of trouble with remembering names. And in real life and in books. And I never had that problem with Harry Potter. I've always been able to differentiate the characters, remember the characters, remember things that happen, because she is so good at detail and she's so good at characters. As far as the non-spoilery review of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, I would say that it's completely magical, and I would recommend it to everybody, no matter how old you are. A lot of people do like to wait to let their kids read it until they're 11 and then have them read it at the same age as each kid. I think that would be hard, because then you're going to make your kid wait a year between each book. That is what happened to the 11-year-olds that were 11 when it first came out. But now, if I were an 11-year-old coming to this for the first time, I would be so mad if the books were sitting on the shelf and my mom made me wait. So I would say that you know your own kid, or your kid knows their limits. And I don't think the books are ever so dark or scary that it's too much for even the most sensitive of kids, because my kids are actually very sensitive to quite a few things, or at least they were, especially my youngest was when she was younger. And the first time I read this book out loud to my kids, my oldest, I believe, was 9, and my youngest would have been 5. And she was a little bit scared in a few parts, and she was sad about a few parts. But she did really well, and I edited a few things here and there, but I didn't have to do that very much. We've read them twice since then, and that's been about 8 or 9 years, and we've read them at least one more time. I think we've read them twice, and they've been fine both times. But my older daughter, that was 9 at the time, she might have been 10. As soon as I finished reading out the whole series to them, she immediately started reading them again herself. The dark elements aren't occultish or scary dark. They are just, it gets darker because they are fighting evil. And so these books are definitely a theme of good versus evil, of sacrifice, of love, of friendship. This one is pretty tame still. I just think it's a worthwhile series for anyone, and especially for children. Some kids may be hesitant in reading. I think this is a really good book to bring them to reading and to books. I know a lot of kids have become readers because of this series. All right, now I'm going to get into talking a little bit more in depth about this book. And some of this is spoilery, some of it isn't. So if you don't want to be spoiled at all for anything that happens in the book or anything about the books, then you should probably stop watching. But if you don't mind that, then stick around. I mentioned before that she was planning these books out for 5 whole years before she ever wrote the first sentence of the first book, after she got the idea. So there is so much detail and intricacy to these books, so many deep themes, so many layers. And one of the things to understand, to to really understand that is to know how many different literary traditions that she brought to these books. Some people, when you start talking about the deeper themes and the things that you see in her books, some people will say, no, that's a stretch. You're just reading what you want into the books. She didn't mean any of these things. But she herself has said that she wrote the book for obsessives who would turn out every detail for meaning. It isn't a stretch to look for the meaning and layers in her books. I've recently taken a class. I've talked about this in another video. I've recently taken a class about Harry Potter, and I've read quite a few books. So that is where a lot of my information comes from my own reading and from the classes and books that I've been taking. And one thing to think about when reading her books is that on the Literary Life podcast, they talked about that books used to be meant to be read symbolically. So many books were written that way. And people kind of knew that. There were universal symbols. When a unicorn was in a book, everybody knew what that was a symbol for. And there were certain things like that were just universal, or at least Western universal. We've got away from that. And so in the 1990s, when Harry Potter first came out, children's books would not have been symbolically read. And we've kind of forgotten how to read symbolically because it's not something that we really do anymore. And not every book has to be written that way. Not every book has to be read that way. The way that Angelina Stanford said it was, I think the way she said it was that Harry Potter allows us to read a new book in an old way, because we are able to read it symbolically the way the books used to be read, and yet it's a new book. But some of the different types of stories or inspirations that are in the Harry Potter series are traditional schoolboy stories, and that is boarding schools. If you read old boarding school books, you will find certain things that pop up in all of them, like the annual school cycle. I just read Mallory Towers by Enid Blyton. That's kind of how it was. It's the first term at Mallory Towers, and you're there for the whole school year. And so usually you'll see that. You usually see a trio of characters as the main characters. With Harry Potter, it's 2 boys and a girl. And in traditional ones, it would have been 3 boys or 3 girls. There are usually, a lot of times, there are competitive sports or what they call games. And sometimes the points can be accumulated toward a championship. There's usually an honor code, not of only just your behavior, but also of not telling tales on other kids. There's almost always a moral dilemma, and different kinds of moral dilemmas, things that kids are trying to decide whether they're right or wrong, and you'll see the growth over the time that they're at the school. It's usually multiple books, just like Harry Potter, so that you're seeing the entire growth cycle from young, immature child that's maybe not making all the right choices to someone who has grown a lot and become a more mature and better person. Usually the heroes or heroines are being unjustly accused of things. There's often a unpleasant character or a bully, sometimes reformed, sometimes not. There are headmasters, there are prefects and head boys and head girls, and usually there's some kind of special relationship between one of the students and one of the teachers. There's usually class rivalry. There's usually a mystery to solve, and a lot of times there are a set of identical twins that are the comic relief or the practical jokers. So if you've read the book or if you're familiar with the series, you can kind of see where all of those would pop in. It is a Christian story, and a lot of people push back on that. I did mention in my video how she based the whole series on 2 different scriptures. But she also has this quote, "I believe in God, not magic. If I talk too freely about that, I think the intelligent reader, whether 10 years old or 60, will be able to guess what is coming in the books." It also has traces of an adventure story and a detective story, because there is a mystery in each book, trying to usually figure out who done it in a way. It also has elements of medieval romance. And in medieval romance, there was usually a wild man character, somebody who was often hairy, somebody who had an affinity with animals, a lot of times lives on a border of a forest or some other kind of world, kind of like Hagrid lives on the border of the Forbidden Forest. And of course, all the magical creatures like centaurs and unicorns. I talked about this in a sprint with my other co-hosts a few weeks ago, that the unicorn in Harry Potter, so this is definitely going to get spoilery right now, this goes with the Christian symbol as well, that a unicorn universally was an image of Christ. And in Harry Potter, when the unicorn is being killed, it is made known how horrible of a thing it is to kill a unicorn, and that their blood will keep someone alive. It grants immortality, but the person that kills it will have a half-life, a cursed life. There also are elements of a Gothic novel. John Granger said, Harry Potter is a schoolboy novel steeped, no, make that saturated, in Gothic touches, effects, and cliches. So with a Gothic tale, it would be set in a castle, a manor, or a monastery, have supernatural atmosphere, subterranean passages, so usually underground tunnels of some kind or hidden passages. Usually the character is going to be isolated at some point from other characters. There will be prophecies or ancestral curses, graveyards, forests, sacrificial bravery, found books, doppelgangers, which I'll get back to in a minute, and a scar or mark of some kind that sets someone apart. With Harry Potter's scar, the lightning bolt scar on his forehead, J.K. Rowling said, I wanted him to be physically marked by what he has been through. It was an outward expression of what he has been through inside. I gave him a scar in a prominent place so other people would recognize him. There's also usually nighttime. Again, Rowling said Hogwarts had to be a boarding school so the children could have nighttime adventures. There's a little bit of satire in the books. There's definitely, obviously, fantasy. It's also an orphan story, another obvious. There's also Shakespeare and Greek drama. There's characters and nods to myth throughout the whole series. There's French and Latin. The magical terms in this book are not meant to be real magic. Most of the time they are Latin phrases that correspond with sounding like what they're supposed to do, but also the meaning is what they're supposed to do. There's also a lot of elements of King Arthur's story in here, some Chaucer with Canterbury Tale, and there's inspiration from Charles Dickens and Jane Austen. Our character is on an identity quest and his hero's journey, and in fact there is a pattern for the hero's journey that each book takes. Every single book has the same pattern. There's a start at Privet Drive, there's a magical escape of some kind, a mystery, a crisis, a descent into the underworld, a combat, Christ symbols, return, revelation, and a finish. And those might not make sense, but if you look that up, you'll find that there are charts. John Granger has made a chart showing each of those steps with each book. Something I touched on in the Christian video is alchemy. That alchemy did not start out as something that is used in the occult. I know I've heard some people that are into occult and New Age stuff kind of take alchemy into what they do, but that's not what it was. You see alchemy throughout these books, the colors, the numbers, and the ideas. And so I won't go into all of that right now because I think that you could read one of the books I recommended in the Christian book or go listen to the Literary Life podcast and you'll get a better description of that than I could probably give on this video. But it's really interesting to see. I'll give one example is the number for alchemy is 713. I think that's the number for the gold. And that is the number for the vault that Harry goes to in the beginning, where they get the Philosopher's Stone, which was a real thing. I mentioned in a video that I was learning about the tripartite soul. And this is something that came from Plato, and it's that each soul has the three ruling parts. There's the brain and the heart and the belly. So the brain or the head, it was reason and logic. And then the belly is, of course, our passion, our desires. The heart, or the chest, is your spirit, your will, your strength. And that's what's meant to lead you. And your chest keeps your heart, or keeps your head and your belly taking over and being in charge, because neither one of those things will usually lead you to exactly what you're supposed to do. And what you'll find in a lot of books, in a lot of stories that have a trio of characters, is that they will fit those roles. So in Harry Potter, when you look at the tripartite soul, and I learned this first from the Literary Life podcast, and then I read about it in the John Granger book, and then I've read some other things about it online. But the Hermione obviously would be the head, and Harry is the chest, and Ron is the belly. And you can see that whenever Ron is leading, then it's usually hot-headed and too much of the passion driving. When Hermione is leading, there might be too much logic. We have to think about this too much. Harry, most of the time, has very good intuition, and he has a lot of moral strength. And when he is leading, then the three of them, they are ordered. When they are apart from each other or not working well together, then disordered, it's usually because they're not in their proper positions. So that's a really interesting concept. If you want to go learn more about it, I would. In the first chapter, The Boy Who Lived, we meet the Dursleys. First, we get to see what their world is like, and we get to see 4 Privet Drive, which is supposed to be very boring. A boring number. Privets are these kind of enclosed hedgerows in England, very suburban, very normal. And we immediately get the distinction between the world of the Dursleys and the world of imagination. Even where Mr. Dursley works, he makes drills. Everything is supposed to be very boring in contrast to what is going to happen. We see Dumbledore for the first time. We see McGonagall. We know immediately that she can turn into a cat, and he gets left there. So in the next chapter, then we get to go ahead in time 10 years and see what Harry's life is like. We find out he's living in the closet under the stairs. We find out that Dudley, his cousin, is very spoiled. And you're immediately drawn into that world and put into a place of sympathy with Harry, so that you are feeling the injustice and wanting something better for him. So of course, when Hagrid shows up, then we are given that excitement. We want him to go with him. We want him to go to the school. We don't know anything about it yet, but we want him to go, because we want him to have that chance and to be important and special and to know he's special. Hagrid is kind of used as a tool as well, because he answers all of Harry's questions about the world that are questions we may have as the reader. And so he is used as that tool to answer the questions to Harry, so that he's also answering them for us. In chapter 5, they go to Diagon Alley. That is our first portal into the magical world. J.K. Rowling put the portal in Lily Cauldron, the pub, and that is on Charing Cross Road, which is a road known for books, for booksellers. And that is because she said that she was very intrigued by the idea of the place with the little pools in Narnia, where each pool is a different world. And she felt like that was what a library was like, and that books were portals to the other worlds. And so she, of course, wanted the portal to her world to be on a street of books. In Diagon Alley, of course, we're introduced to the magic, we're introduced to the shops, we're introduced to all of the different elements that are helping us to see more of what this world is like. We also meet Draco Malfoy. And when I talked about doppelgangers in these kind of books, usually in a fairy story, there are elements of the real world in the fairy story. So think Wizard of Oz. When she goes to Oz and the characters are the same people. When she comes back, you were there and you were there. So there's usually that kind of element. And Draco is the Dudley of this fairy world. They both are blonde. You wouldn't know that from the movies, but in the books they are both blonde. They are both spoiled only children. And then they also are a set of 3. So Draco has Crabbe and Goyle, and Dudley has his 2 friends that he usually is with. They both have a trio that bully Harry. You can also apply the tripartite soul to Draco and Crabbe and Goyle, and you can see how they are always disordered because they are all belly. Here they also go to Mr. Ollivander's wand shop, and Harry gets his first wand. The fun thing about the wand shop is that on Pottermore, J.K. Rowling has written quite a bit of extra content that gives you more story about different characters. And one of the things she has on there is an article that's kind of like Ollivander is writing it himself, and he talks about the different kinds of wood. And so if you look at the different wands that are given in this chapter, where we find out what kind of wand it is, it gives a little bit of information right there about that person. For example, Harry's wand is holly, and holly is one of the rarer kinds of wand woods traditionally considered protective. It works most happily for those who may need help overcoming a tendency to anger or impetuosity. At the same time, holly wands often choose owners who are engaged in some dangerous and often spiritual quest. Holly is one of those woods that varies most dramatically in performance depending on the wand core, and it is notoriously difficult wood to team with phoenix feather, as the wood's volatility conflicts strangely with the phoenix's detachment. In the unusual event of such a pairing, finding its ideal match, however, nothing and nobody should stand in their way. And of course, he does have a phoenix feather as the core. And then we also find out that Voldemort also has a phoenix feather as the core. 2 feathers from one phoenix, and they each have one in their wand core. Voldemort's wand is yew wood, and that says yew wands are among the rarer kinds, and their ideal matches are likewise unusual and occasionally notorious. The wand of yew is reputed to endow its possessor with the power of life and death, which might of course be said of all wands, and yet yew retains a particularly dark and fearsome reputation in the spheres of dueling and all curses. It never chooses either a mediocre or a timid owner. Then he goes to platform 9 3/4. We see him trying to get through and meeting the Weasleys, and they help him to get through to that magical portal. And so, of course, him and Ron kind of just fall into friendship. And we immediately get that bond with them. And then we meet Hermione, and of course she's kind of bossy, and they don't have the immediate draw with her. One thing I forgot to mention is, one thing I learned from the podcast is that something that's important in books that were read symbolically is that if it mentions the way somebody's dressed, a lot of times that is a hint to them. And it says that Harry's clothes were baggy, his clothes don't fit. And that's the identity quest that he's on. It shows that who he thinks he is not who he is. And so when they go on the train and they're on their way to Hogwarts, one of the things that they do before they get there is that they change their clothes. They make it to Hogwarts, go at the Sorting Hat, he's put into Gryffindor with Ron and Hermione. Even though they're not in the best friend group with Hermione yet, we still see her personality, so we're getting to know her. And then Halloween comes, and they finally get to be that ordered soul together. For a long time, I wondered about Hermione when the troll thing happens and she lies about why she was there, saying that she went looking for it. I never understood that. I thought, why didn't she just tell them she was in there crying? But through the study, there were a few things that stuck out to me that made me realize, oh, she didn't want to tell them that she was in there crying because Ron and Harry were the reason she was crying. So it would make them look bad. So she was protecting them by lying. Not that lying is okay. That goes very well with the boarding school idea. As you see kids that are doing things that maybe aren't always the best option or making the right choices, but they bond each other together. We learn about Quidditch. We see that Harry is naturally talented at it. He starts playing it. In the Quidditch chapter, we also learn an important piece of information. When Hagrid says that he got Fluffy from a Greek chappie, then that should tell us that it is a nod to Cerberus from the Greek myth. And Cerberus was guarding the entrance to the underworld. A three-headed dog. He was put to sleep with a harp. And so that little bit of information, if you knew the story, you would know immediately, okay, this is Cerberus. That means when they saw him, he's guarding something. It's some kind of entrance to an underworld, and tells you how to calm him down. And then we have Christmas break. Harry finds the mirror of Erised, which is desire backwards. He sees his family. J.K. Rowling has said that if she was looking in that mirror, she would see her mom too. This is when we also learn, when Ron is looking at it, we understand that he is on an identity quest as well. He is wearing hand-me-downs. So kind of like Harry's clothes didn't fit him because his identity didn't fit him yet. Ron is overshadowed by his brothers, his older brothers, and so he is wearing their clothes. And when Ron looks in, he sees himself as the head boy, as the team captain. He sees himself standing out because that is what he desires. He's also on an identity quest. One of the most interesting things to me that I've learned is that those 7 obstacles at the end, they all match up to a book in the series. So Fluffy is the one that matches this book. He is a magical creature. He's an introduction to this world. And this book has a lot of magical creatures in it. Also, we are seeing our trio working as one, just like the three-headed dog is one dog. And the other ones actually work even better, but we see them have to get past the dog. We see them get into the devil's snare. I won't bring up what they have in common with the other books, but if you know that they all match up with another book, you might be able to make your own connections, and then I can try to bring those up when I talk about the other books later. But then we have the flying keys to unlock the door. And you'll also notice that each one of these obstacles brings out a magical skill or talent that they've had to learn that year. And then they go and play wizard's chess. And this one was interesting because usually in America we would think of chess as a head sport. It's a thinking sport, but it's also battle. And Ron is the passionate one. Then they go to the troll, and this is an interesting part because knowing the end of the book, it should have been a clue to them that it was Quirrell at the end and not Snape. The narrative that she chose was perfect for these books because it's the third person omniscient, but it's limited, the third person limited view. And so it's like we're being able to get Harry's thoughts, but we're also seeing other things. So you feel like you're getting everything, but you're not. You're still only getting what he can see and do. Everything you see, you're no matter what it is, you're twisting it to Harry's viewpoint. So you're thinking it's Snape. But at this point, when they saw the troll was down, with him being the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, then it should be obvious that whoever was able to defeat the troll so easily probably is the one that's at the end. And so especially when they get to the next part where it's riddle and potions, you would know that Snape was the teacher that put that there. That probably should have been their first clue that they weren't going to find Snape at the end. Another thing to look out for if you've read all the series or if you're reading it right now and you've read this one is that the potions with the riddles, that the order that the potion and the wine is in matches up to book 6. You will find that order of those things in that book. So then we get to the final obstacle, and he goes in and he expects to see Snape and he sees Quirrell instead. The last obstacle is the Mirror of Erised. The inscription on the mirror is backwards, so if you read it in a mirror, you'd be able to see what it says. I show not your face, but your heart's desire. So that tells us exactly, what Dumbledore told him as well. We see the selflessness in Harry at this part. Even though he's only 11, even though this is the first year, we already see the moral courage, we already see the traditional bravery, and we see the selflessness and that goodness in him. He is able to get the stone because he's able to see it, even though he knows what it is, and only want it to not use it. We find out here that Harry is protected by his mom's blood, by her sacrifice, and Voldemort, through Quirrell, is not able to touch that. That also has some Christian undertones to it. In every single book, there's some kind of representation of death, and this is him going unconscious. That would have been a symbol of death, and he is unconscious for 3 days. So that's another Christian symbol. When he wakes up, he has his talk with Dumbledore. He finds out what's been happening, what he's been missing, and then he's able to end the story with a feast. And of course, most fairy tale stories end with a feast or a wedding, some kind of ceremony where everybody's brought back together. And this is also where we see, some might say is a little unfair, but how Gryffindor wins because of the points that the 3 of them are able to be given for what they've just done. But then we also see that Neville, the one who stood up to them and tried to keep them from going, because he didn't understand what they were doing, he didn't know how important it was, that they weren't just being naughty, that he is given the most points for the moral courage to stand up to his friends. Now for an even more spoilery part, these books are written on a ring cycle. So books 1 and 7 go together, 2 and 6, 3 and 5, and then 4 is the hinge point. And so when you read this, if you've read book 7, if you know that they're written this way, you will see mirrors in those books of each other. If you haven't read book 7, you'll want to get off now. And I will have another review up for Chamber of Secrets probably in the next couple of weeks. But thank you for watching this far. In book 1, Hagrid delivers Harry to Privet Drive on a motorcycle. In book 7, he takes Harry away from Privet Drive for the last time on a motorcycle. Harry is orphaned in book 1. Teddy is orphaned in book 7. And if you've read both books, you know that there is a sacrificial death that protects others. In book 1, we find out that Lily Potter has given her life for Harry, not just because she died trying to protect him, but because she didn't have to die. Voldemort was only going to kill James and Harry. He was not going to kill Lily. He gave her the opportunity to move out of the way, but she wouldn't. She died for her son when she didn't have to. And that sacrificial death made her blood a way that Harry was saved. And in book 7, he voluntarily goes to the forest to die for his friends. And when you're reading book 7 again next time, you'll notice there are spells bouncing around, and so many of his friends and people at Hogwarts are protected in an unusual way after he had died. His mother protected him with her sacrificial death. He protected his friends with his sacrificial death. That is also a Christian symbol of Christ's blood. Obviously, she's not saying either one of them are Christ. And there is anybody else that points out the Christian symbolism. It's just meant to point us there. These will probably be even easier to do when I've just read the book. I have a lot of this information fresh in my mind because I've immersed in it as I've planned my daughter's curriculum and taken a class. But it would have been a lot easier if I just read the book. So hopefully with the other ones that will come a little bit easier. I will probably have a review of Chamber of Secrets up in the next couple of weeks. Of course, some more tag videos throughout this month. Hopefully nobody's going to get sick of Harry Potter this month. I know I don't. So hopefully you guys don't as well.